I'm Rolf Perelius with Shooter's Paradise. Let's talk about self-defense in a church. There's a whole bunch of considerations, a whole bunch of items that I need to think about before I make preparations to protect myself or my loved ones in a religious facility, a church, a synagogue, a mosque. So the first one I would look at is to do it legally. It's incredibly important that I have a permit if it's required of me, or training if they require special training, whatever the laws are in my area. It's incredibly important that I follow those because, well, conflict never happens at church, right? Yes, that's right. There's lots of conflict at church because there's people there. And the last thing the world I need is for somebody to call the police and say that I have a firearm. The police show up and question me about that, and yes, I do have a firearm, and then I'm not following the law. I can then expect to be arrested and charged. Maybe I'll get a misdemeanor charge of some kind, and very possibly I'll get a felony charge. Well, if I'm convicted of a felony, I lose my right to own a gun. That's a serious negative outcome. So I would strongly recommend that you check the laws in your locale and you follow the law in regards to carrying a church. Second item I would recommend is that you conceal the gun. That's right, don't let anybody know you're carrying. If somebody knows you're carrying and there's some kind of a conflict that arises in the church, which of course there never is conflict in churches, a person can call the police and say so-and-so has a gun. And if that were to happen, I could be charged with aggravated assault with a firearm, depending on what the law is for charges in your area. Those are going to be very strong misdemeanors or potentially felonies. And as we said before, you don't want to be convicted of a felony and lose your right to own a firearm. That's absolutely not what you want to do. And even if it is just a misdemeanor assault charge, you can rest assured that it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to handle that charge. It will not be cheap. So there is no good outcome there. I want to make sure my firearm is not visible or no one can tell that I'm carrying a gun. Third item, if I go to the church and I'm an active member there, it's very likely that at some point or another, I'll be asked to do something, which might mean I have to take my coat off. It would be very good to have some way to securely store my firearm. Simply putting my gun in my car in the glove box is not really adequate. You see, it's entirely possible for somebody to get the keys to my vehicle. Teenage kids, a spouse, something like that. My vehicle gets unlocked and now other people can get access to my firearm. Untrained, irresponsible youngsters can get a hold of my firearm. That would be a serious negative outcome. And for roughly $20, I can get a safe to go in my vehicle that will protect the gun and can be cable locked to maybe the legs of the seat in the vehicle or something like that. So it's not expensive to get a secure method to store your gun. And I would have made arrangements like that for my firearm in the event that I need to do something and I need to remove it and store it while I'm at church. A fourth item, get training. Practice with your firearm. Practice on a routine basis. Have any of you all ever been gifted a guitar or went out and bought a guitar? Did that make you a musician? Absolutely not. The fact of the matter is, it is ridiculously easy to miss your target when you have an adrenaline response, when somebody is trying to kill other people, and that's the only reason you would draw your firearm in a church, is if somebody was there to kill people. In that event, your heart rate is going to be 220. You're going to lose peripheral vision. You'll have tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, lots of things happening. Your ability to hit the target is going to drop dramatically. Get training, You don't know what you don't know. Take classes, learn the stuff that's out there. People have paid in blood for the lessons that they teach. Yes, the lessons that are taught in classes, a lot of those were paid for in blood. So find out what's out there. Learn what you don't know. Read books. Go to the range on a routine basis and practice. If you're going to carry a firearm into a church to defend yourself in that environment, you owe it, everybody, to be a very good shot. Another item that I would consider is, how are you going to identify the threat? Well, that seems pretty stupid and easy, right? But is it? How many bad guys are there? Is it just one? Is there three? Are there three? That other guy that stood up with a gun, is he also a good guy with a gun? How many people are there concealed carrying in the church? I don't know. It's impossible to tell. Many people aren't going to let other people know, which is my recommendation. So I pull out my gun, and then the other good guy sees me. How does he know I'm a good guy? How does he know that's the bad guy, I'm the good guy? How do I know he's a good guy? How do I know he's not another bad guy? This is a serious thing that we need to look at and give a lot of thought to, because we can compound tragedies immeasurably without having thought this through. Sixth item I would consider, do you have a less lethal tool with you if you're going to conceal carry? Not every conflict that needs resolution and needs a level of force to resolve needs lethal force. I don't always need to shoot. I might need pepper spray. I might need something else like that. Give that some serious thought. If all you have is a firearm, all you can do is shoot. It would be very, very good to have a $10 can of pepper spray with you. That would be a tremendous benefit to you. The seventh item I would look at is just how are you going to shoot this bad guy? If you're in a congregation of, say, 100 people, and the bad guy jumps up with a gun and fires off a shot, because realistically, how are you going to know there's a bad guy there unless that happens? That pretty often we know we have a problem when bullets start to fly. And quite frankly, even people who have been watching others and thought they were probably a problem, normally they don't actually know for sure until somebody gets shot. So bullets are flying, and I whip out my gun, and of course, as we spoke, there's another problem with somebody else whipping out their gun. Now, when I whip out my gun, how can I shoot this individual safely? Because I have to make sure that my shot doesn't hurt innocent people. Like we said, we can compound tragedy just terribly. This is a very important thing. I would recommend getting training to shoot from a kneeling position and from a sitting on the floor, like sitting on your feet. I would strongly recommend training from a low position, because if you are both high and you shoot, well, the bullets are all traveling in a plane through the church at chest height through the church. And if anybody is standing up in the path of the bullet, they're going to get hit. And if anybody stands up, that's a very big thing, because you'll have three reactions that I've commonly seen to gunfire in a church. One of those reactions is people dive for cover, and they dive under the pew. Another reaction is people freeze. They just freeze. And then a third reaction I've seen is people jump up and run around. Yes, while bullets are flying, people jump up and run around. Panic. Not everybody does things that are smart in those life and death situations. So somebody can run into my line of fire. So I would consider, rather than having shots fired at an equal level at chest height where they're going to go on a plane throughout the whole church, how about I learn how to kneel down flat on the floor and then shoot upward at my target, so if I miss, my round goes into the ceiling. That's far better than my round going into Aunt May. Yeah. Now, I can't do anything about what the bad guy's doing, and I need to neutralize him as quick as possible. but it would be far better if my backstop were the ceiling of the church building rather than Aunt May. That would not be a good thing if I miss and hit Aunt May. So if I miss and put rounds into the ceiling, that's a far better outcome. So learning how to shoot from a kneeling position down low and aiming upward at my target might be an effective way to limit the danger of shooting in a church. And remember this too, the moment my gun comes out, I've just signed a bunch of people's death warrants. And those people are my friends and my family and my church. The reason I say I've signed a bunch of death warrants is because when my gun comes out, their gun comes out. When my gun comes out, now they have to make a choice to save their own life because I'm a lethal threat to them and they don't care about others. And so they're going to spray rounds in my general direction. Yeah, it's a tough thing. So a lot of thought ought to be given as to where, if I'm carrying a firearm and I intend to defend myself in church, a lot of thought ought to be given to where I'm seated, what would happen if somebody came in with a gun, what would happen if somebody came in with a gun in this part of the congregation, what about that part of the congregation, what about over there, what about over here. All these things need to be carefully thought through. This is an incredibly tricky, dangerous situation. You've got people 360 degrees around you almost all the time in a church setting. And even if you don't, the moment gunfire starts, you can expect there to be 360 degree people because people run around like crazy. It's called panic. So that's an important thing. How will I shoot and not hit Aunt B? Another thing I want to consider is security teams. A couple questions I'd like to pose to church security team members. First question is, do you know who's having domestic problems in your church? That's very important information to have, because where's the trouble that you have to deal with going to come from? A terrorist coming in to make some kind of a political statement by killing people in your church? That's a 1 in a zillion likelihood. That is, you're far more likely to be struck by lightning than to have that happen. So while that may be a risk that you would like to prevent, what's far more likely is two members of the church that only attend occasionally have a conflict in their relationship, and the man comes to the church later to make her pay. That's far more likely. A domestic dispute that erupts into the church, that is far more likely. So we need to consider what the likelihood of the problem is, and are we getting information about this to our church security team? Do they know to watch out for this one because of some things that have happened recently? That information is critical. Church security teams, do you have someone stationed in the parking lot? The best thing you can do is keep problem people out of the sanctuary. If they're outside, they're going to have a hard time hurting large amounts of people in the sanctuary. So it is far better to interact with these people outside the sanctuary if that's necessary. The other thing about parking lots is people don't back into parking spaces very often. They pull in, and so they're backing up and leaving the church, and you have little kids running all over. The likelihood of somebody being hit and run over in a parking lot is exceedingly high. So having somebody who's watching out for the safety of others positioned in the church parking lot can help prevent those kinds of accidents. And that happens a lot. Okay, so church security teams, do you have plans for fire? What will you do in the case of a massive fire at the church? You've thought about a gunman coming into the church and how you would defend church members with a active shooter situation. Have you thought about an active arson situation? All that would be required is somebody to pull up in a vehicle, hop out, put a 5-gallon can of gas outside the exit doors. Let's say the church has 4 exit doors. All they've got to do is put one 5-gallon can outside of each exit door and light that can of gas off. And now there's no exit from the building except for windows. How are you going to evacuate people in a situation like that? Do you have an evacuation plan? Can you get control of the panicking people and get them where they need to be? These are questions that you really need to ask yourself. How about car accidents? Well, most churches are located on a thoroughfare, some kind of a busy street. It's kind of rare that churches are located in the back of a subdivision somewhere. Oftentimes they're right off the rural highway. Well, do you have people who are ready to provide medical aid to a car accident that happens in the street right in front of the church? That's a very important thing. Trauma medical training is critical. Having somebody or having multiple people who can give first aid in a situation like a car accident or even a shooting is critical. It's not that expensive to get the training. It's not that hard to learn what needs to be learned. There's really no excuse for a real church security team for not having a solid trauma medical plan in place. There's really no excuse for it. And speaking about that, where's your AED? You should have an AED at your church. They're not that expensive. They're easy to use. They're designed for children to be able to use them. They can save lives. Think about heart attacks. A heart attack is far more likely to happen than to have an active shooter. I need to be more prepared for a heart attack occurring in my sanctuary than I need to be for an active shooter. And if I've only prepared for the active shooter and have not made plans to deal with somebody who's having a heart attack, I'm really missing the bus there. This is a big thing I'd like to convey to church security team members. You get no special treatment. You get no special powers. There is no special accolades or anything given to you for being a church security team member. You are held to the same standard for your use of force as anyone else in regard to self-defense. You are allowed to use force to help other people under the coming to the aid of a third party aspect of your state's laws. So you need to study when exactly are you allowed to come to the aid of a third party, because it would be really, really horrible if you have done all this stuff and prepared to protect your church flock, and then you find that you stepped outside of the appropriate law in regards to coming to the aid of a third party, and now you're being charged with a homicide charge and you're facing life in prison, and your legal offense is going to cost $200,000, and the stresses and strains have broken up your marriage and all the other stuff that can happen. It can be terrifying. The costs of using lethal force can be terrifying. So understand that you're not getting any special treatment under the law. You're not getting any special considerations. You're being held to the same standard as if you were simply walking down a dark alley going to a convenience store in downtown your city, USA. You're not getting any special consideration. So that's an important thing. You have no arrest powers. There's nothing. Think about what you're risking to protect the members of your church. You're risking your freedom for the rest of your life, your marriage, any assets you have, your home, your property. All of that can disappear in a heartbeat because of the costs involved with using lethal force. There will be an investigation. The people who have been patted on the back for use of lethal force in churches are minuscule compared to the people who have been charged in that regard. Yeah, it's don't think that just because you drew your gun and prevented what you saw as being a tragedy from occurring in your church, that everybody is going to think you're a hero. Quite frankly, the DA in your town may not think you're a hero. He may think, she may think you're a criminal. So think about what you're risking. And I would strongly recommend to church security teams that you do not identify yourselves as church security teams, and you don't let people in the church know who's armed and who's not. That's the last thing you want, because people will volunteer you for things that they have no idea what the consequences of are. Little Aunt Sue, she'll jump up and say, well, you've got a gun, stop him, when the guy hasn't done anything to justify anything. And now you have a serious situation on your hand because this has just escalated something that was nothing into World War V. So give serious consideration to the benefit of no one knowing you have a gun at church. And people will feel more comfortable if they don't know that you have a gun. People without training tend to be nervous around other people who are carrying firearms. They don't know what they don't know. So those are some things that I would just throw out there to consider. I would go over the first part of the list again. For those of you who aren't church security team members per se, when you're going to carry a gun at church for self-defense, number one, do it legal. Get the permit, get the training, whatever's required. Number two, conceal it so nobody can tell you have a firearm. 3, make arrangements so that you can safely and privately secure that firearm in your vehicle if you have to leave it there. Number 4, get training. You don't know what you don't know. It just is what it is. Practice on a routine basis. You have an obligation not to shoot little Susie in the church. 5, think about how you're going to identify the threat. Think that through. How are you going to identify other good guys who happen to have guns that you didn't know about in the church? Think about, number 6, carry a less lethal option, pepper spray. That can dissuade a lot of people and prevent you from having to shoot them, which is a very good thing. And try number 7, how are you going to shoot in a group of 100 panicking people and not miss your target and hit somebody on your side, your family members, your friends? How are you going to do that? Give some serious thought to that. I hope this has been helpful. We'd love to talk to you about this. Drop us a question if you have a question. Thank you.